Hello, welcome to Spoken Mirrors, the interview series for Far from the Madding Crowd Bookshop, where we talk to authors and literary types of all stripes. And today I am joined by Helen McClory. Hello,
Hi there. Thanks for having me on.
not a problem. So I want to start talking about Bitterhall, most recent release. I mean, this feels very to me. It felt very unlike a lot of Scottish contemporary fiction at the moment. It seemed to have come more from some kind of continental tradition, quote unquote, especially with the and I'm going to mangle this name, but the epigraph from Helen Sissu. Sissu?
That's how I say it. I think that's right. I'm not sure.
That's I think yeah, we can roll with that. Yeah, so I mean, I was just wondering, was that a sort of conscious decision to kind of come from a left field with Bitterhall in that sense?
I think it just comes down to what I like to read
Hmm.
generally, and what my influences are. I tend to try and read lots of European fiction, lots of Irish fiction as well.
Hmm.
I sort of see my work quite tying into Irish fiction, although I'm not Irish, despite the surname. The kind of more lyrical aspects I enjoy. And this is being horribly generalizing. Obviously, not all Irish fiction is beautifully lyrical, but and yeah, it wasn't a conscious choice to be distinctive in that way. It was just, yeah, the streams that feed into the book itself
Hmm.
kind of coming forward.
I mean, that's interesting because I mean, yeah, like the Kevin Barry and that kind of lyricism get definitely there, but I think also David Hayden, Darker with the Lights On collection. I was thinking about that collection a lot while reading, sort of your flash fictions and short stories in that regard. Yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
I love his work. It's really great.
yeah,
Uh, it's totally underappreciated, I think.
I think so as well. He's yes, I mean, and it's such a beautiful edition as well from Little Island Press with like the hardback of it. Um, yeah, yeah, good sort of neo-modernist, oblique in the best way possible, sort of yeah. Um, so another sort of thing about Bitterhall that I found quite interesting was the centerpiece is sort of a party, and I find the setting of a party. It's a really interesting. It's quite underappreciated. I feel in literature because it is this sort of emotionally intense, temporary, liminal, for lack of a better, space, which is kind of like gets shot through with a lot of meaning. So I mean, yeah, what was your thinking for? Because it's a sort of interwar themed house party, basically at the center of it, which gets retold three times. Um, so yeah, I mean, what was your thinking with choosing the party, I guess, and trying to fictionalize the party?
I think it is a good stage, a party just generally for lots of different pieces to be moving on and for people not to entirely know what's happening at once. It's very hard to have an overall view of a party, a godlike view of a party. It's
Mm,
just little bits and pieces here kind of coming together on the night, fragmenting and breaking off. And usually there's a lot of alcohol involved. So people maybe don't have the correct memories of what's happening or interpretations. So for that, it was just really rich, narratively speaking,
mm,
especially for the themes of the book with um, kind of unreliability and the self, because you are at a party, if I distantly remember parties, um, creating yourself with the people that you're speaking to, and they're creating themselves, and
mm.
it kind of mashes all together and changes. And I just find it fascinating, and I love reading about parties in books as well. I'm currently reading A Dance to the Music of Time,
Oh yeah,
and there's multiple party sequences in that, and I just find it all really so fascinating.
mm.
Although his depictions of parties are very dry and witty, and nobody seems too badly drunk, just a little
Right.
tipsy.
Yeah, well, I mean, a friend of mine pointed out that Mrs. Dalloway, the Wolf novel, is set right after the 1918 influenza pandemic,
Mm.
which is why everyone in that novel is sort of holding parties and stuff, which is the sort of interesting uh, And I guess in the same way that we all want to forget the last 2 years, I feel like a century ago they probably also wanted to just not ever think about that ever again. And so, did you work on this novel? Did you start on it before the lockdown? It's sort of been quite a long germination process, right?
Yes, I actually wrote it very quickly in about a year, but that was back in 2017, 2018,
Mm.
and it was finished in 2018. And then took out ages to get a publisher, ages and ages. And then the publisher said, "Oh, we'll publish it in 2 years." So it's just been that long. Just the process of getting things to publication is just very achingly slow.
Yes.
And then, of course, everything that's happened with lockdown has slowed it down even more. And kind of curtailed its escape into the world. It's
Mm.
supposed to be translated into Italian, but I'm not sure when that's going to happen,
Oh,
just because
exciting.
of.
Nice. And sort of, yeah, how was the process? Because you had your first novel, Flesh of the Peach, which came out around 2017 as well. And I mean, I feel like, in some ways, would would it be accurate to say that Bitter Hall is more conceptual? I suppose. I mean, would it be insulting to say Flesh of the Peach is almost semi autobiographical in the lineage of debut novels in that sense?
It's really not.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in any of the same circumstances as
Mm.
the main character. Um, and I'm happy to say that it's not, because I actually wrote a novel before that, which was for my PhD, which was the semi autobiographical one,
Ah.
got that all out of the way.
Yes.
The only thing is that I lived in New York, and I went to New Mexico, where the main character goes, but just for research for the novel.
Right.
So I don't have any similarities between her. There's no similarities there.
No.
But so the real autobiographical one is kind of hidden away and it's not going to get published, I guess.
I mean, yeah. I suppose the sort of the test on the pilot episode, as it were. What drew you to New York? What was?
Um, my husband's American, so
Uh.
he wanted to move to New York and explore being in the diplomatic community
Right.
and work for NGOs. And so while I was there, I worked as a dog walker.
Right.
Probably my only interesting anecdote from the time working there is that I was briefly Lou Reed and Laurie Anderson's dog walker. So I was interviewed for the position by Lou Reed, which
Oh
is
my
kind of
God!
crazy.
Wow. Goodness. Well, is he as Lou Reed as is he as you imagine? Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. It was so fantastically rock and roll cantankerous. Uh, and I got to be in his house as well, which was just kind of wild.
That's insane.
See his
Wow.
dog.
Wow. Yeah.
There's a documentary about his dog, actually, recommended.
Oh, is that did Laurie Anderson do a film about a dog? Is that the
Yeah,
one?
that's the one. Yeah.
Ah, wow. Yes. Huh. Brilliant. So sort of moving vastly away from the States, I guess. I mean that must have been interesting to be living in the dying empire, the Western Empire, and sort of settled there for a hot minute, I guess, before.
Yeah. Just to be like, wow, it's really hard to live here. And it's not just hard to live in New York, it's hard to live in America. I think I
Yeah.
didn't have health insurance and it
Yeah.
was a bit rough.
Country the size of a hemisphere. I mean, it's just no right. Um, so I wanted to talk about. I think that a lot of discourse about Bitter Hall so far. It's kind of talked about the Gothic, and even though that wasn't intention for you, or was it? Or was it intention? It's just sort of a coincidental.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just sort of happening. The dark imagination, I think,
Mm.
just sort of came about that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose also because I was reminded of like James Hogg with the doubling and the doubles, and also obviously the Edinburgh setting, and uh, and the like. But yeah, I mean, what am I trying to say? Um, well, I suppose, is there any elements of the Gothic that you think are almost critiquable or almost like contentious, which you would have kind of wanted to distance yourself from?
Uh, that have made their way into the novel, or that people have read there, or just generally critiquing the Gothic?
Just all three, I guess. Yeah.
Ooh. There is a kind of tradition in the Gothic of being afraid of foreigners, which comes through a lot in Dracula, which I read recently.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit uncomfortable. I think that should be put firmly in the past, or just left to people who are studying it for PhDs. That shouldn't really be something we pull out and use. In terms of my own work, I think it's not so much the Gothic aspect, but there was one review that wanted to know what the secret code of the novel was.
The one meaning.
Yeah, they read the bit at the very beginning, which discusses there is a center to the novel, and they said, "Oh, is it a conspiracy between this one character or this other character?" Right. And it was like, "No, that's not it."
Is that do you wrestle with that sort of because obviously talking about your work dealing with subjectivity, and I mean you had a really great line, I think it was with the Lighthouse book events, where you said you had a big issue with the realism, which I loved. And I think that sort of skepticism of reality is really interesting in your debut sort of collection, On the Edges of Vision. You have the story Ipsity. Ipacity, which I feel like is the most total collapse of that kind of reality in that sense. So yeah, I mean, what exactly is your big issue with realism, or is it how people discuss realism as some kind of superior mode?
Yeah, it's because it's the dominant mode at our current time in terms of respectability, and it's seen as an objective thing that you can have. I think when people write novels about, say, relationships between two people, and this is quite trendy, two straight people who are in love and there's some difficulty, and then it's resolved, which is a really dismissive way of saying it. But taking that mode, it's seen when people write about that as if that is real life and it's got a lot of verisimilitude, but the way that human beings, in my experience, interpret reality is so various and creative and fragmented, broken, confused, elegant, inelegant, muddy, and constantly shifting, so that I don't see why something like that should be called realist. Why is that term applying to that when you could have a book that is stream of consciousness and say, well, okay, that's how we decide that's how people talk, or think. So it's really just the fact that it's so dominant makes me want to kind of kick back against it a wee bit.
Yeah. And with Ipsity specifically, what was the process of writing that like? Was that sort of a very there's a sort of spontaneous lead to that combustion? Because I mean, in that one, the main character sort of, I don't know if it would be accurate to say becomes aware they're a character a la The Comforters or the Spark novel, but basically the story just becomes very aware of itself. So yeah, what was, or from the start of that story, did you kind of the start of that process of working on that piece, did you kind of know it was going to unravel in that way?
I think it was one of those spontaneous ones that I just started writing, and then all the issues that I'd been thinking of kind of bubbled up and came out, because it's such a condensed little story. And I was thinking of Hans Christian Andersen or Brothers Grimm's story, the Tinderbox one. What is it called? Anyway, it was a story I was thinking of in the background about, how we tell fairy tales, and how in fairy tales you can have these weird creatures and they're just accepted, and how there's a sense of artificiality in their construction because they're such old tales. Not looking at, deconstructing a fairy tale in any way like that, but just that mode of how they are oral, always artificial stories. And I wanted to kind of see where a bit of psychological depth would where that would take you
Mm.
in a kind of mode, and it would break down fairly quickly.
Right.
If you put a real human psychology into this formulaic, archaic mode, it's going to crumble.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and I mean that sort of reminds me of uh, sort of like I think of how Nathaniel Hawthorne does interesting things with. Sure. Well, I think with Hawthorne especially, and the reason he comes to mind is because his short stories are wacky. Like for the 1800s, he's almost like bordering on Borges's territory. And I remember there was one bit in his notebook where he basically came up with the idea for Waiting for Godot, and then he was like, "Nah, that's too much. We can't go there. We can't go there yet."
Wow.
I know, yeah. But then it's interesting because his novels, you wouldn't necessarily get that sense of that. So I was wondering, is there a sort of similar dynamic for you? Because I mean, with Bitterhall, there is obviously that speculative thrum beneath the surface, but it's not necessarily, or well, maybe you disagree, but maybe it doesn't scream to critics or the public literary sphere as being speculative in that sense. So is that sort of because it's a longer form, so you don't have to condense that much speculative energy into it?
Yeah, I think so. And there's different threads. Like, I hope it's more than one thing, and that readers can take different things from it, because the plurality is what I want, with having three narrators and all these different possible interpretations. And I just like to have that be kind of spiraling out and intermingling in people's minds, making it a bit slippery, because I think that's what is interactive and interesting. Although the speculative fiction I do enjoy reading, it's like that label seems so constrictive.
Sure.
In terms of, what can you do? Although it's one of the broader ones, I suppose, because you can count a lot of things as speculative.
Well, yeah, I just mean that less in the sort of dismissive sense, and more in the science fiction and fantasy and science fantasy and the weird, and just all the rest of it. But yeah, no, I appreciate that's a contentious term, I suppose. So talking about the characters in Bitterhall, the final story in On the Edges of Vision. This I'm definitely going to mispronounce. Each usage.
Ich Ushke.
Ich usage. I'm not going to pretend that would
It's
just
Gaelic, yeah. Ich Ushke. It means like water horse.
Water horse.
But it's a monster, a type of monster, from
sort of adjacent to Kelpie, or.
Yes, but it is more of a shapeshifter.
I see. Well, I was just reminded because in that story, it is sort of two men and the frustrated desire between them, which reminded me around echoes of Daniel and Tom in Bitterhall. And I was wondering, is there something about that specific sort of character dynamic that you're like interested in, or that
I think any kind of desire is interesting to write about, but straight desire has been written about a lot.
Yes.
So it's less perhaps productive territory for me in terms of what I can explore in it. It feels more prescriptive. Maybe the way I would handle it, not how other people have done, but maybe a little stale sometimes. I'm interested in queer literature, and I think there's more narrative possibility there. So
totally.
I've also written, two women desiring each other in strange ways. Like there was one story, I'm going to mess up the title of my own story, but it was about cutting off somebody's hand and serving it as... Yeah, so that's kind of about desire as well, but more sublimated into strange cannibalism.
Yes. Nice. I think Kirsty Logan had one in Extra Teeth similar to that, didn't she? Or something about butchers. But anyway, as you do, as one does. So in your second collection, Mayhem and Death, there's a lot of stories that relate to film, and have these really interesting connections to film. So I was wondering, where's that come? Does that come from just a love of cinema and what cinema can do and the potential of it? And have you dabbled into like screenwriting and writing for film at all, or any kind of those things?
It does come from that just love of cinema,
Mm.
just generally. I love films. And I hadn't done it before, but I'm just now working on, well, I had done a documentary treatment on, it was for a documentary a Russian filmmaker was making on water.
Right.
So I had to write the treatment for that. But I'm currently writing a treatment for a TV show that is going to hopefully be taken up, but we'll see, with 2 other writers and with a major production company. Going to be set in Scotland. So yeah, I find it fascinating. Like, I just think the way that stories are told on screen is so interesting and influential for how you can write fiction as well, and for generating ideas. Especially if you watch slightly bad films where you think you could have gone in all these different ways, and then you can perhaps test out the waters a bit.
Totally. That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like there's almost a fascination, at least in the last decade and coming to this one, with the bad film. Like then is it Neil Breen who he has these hilariously wacky ones, or The Room is obviously the big example, and those ones, which must be just some ironic fascination we all have with these sort of things. And yeah, and what have there been any differences in the sort of writing process for screen? Well, I mean, how have you found the differences between sort of screenwriting and fiction writing?
Well, it's a lot more communal. Got all these different voices working for what they want to build, and I'm so new to it. I'm kind of getting help, being guided towards what will work on screen. Or over a series, I have just only dipped my toe into it. So I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just describing the process even. But it's so interesting, and I really like working with other minds who are coming up with all these different ideas, generating new possibilities. It's a lot of fun, actually. Nice. Instead of just being sort of stuck in the room by yourself.
Well, I suppose that sort of it's taking that polyphony in your own work and kind of having it be in the actual environment for working on it.
Yeah, that's.
And on that point, would you describe Bitterhall as a kind of, I suppose, quote unquote, decentralizing project, in the sense that you're talking about big themes which can't be dealt with on this individual basis, like the climate crisis and mental health, and especially male mental health, well, in regards to Tom, but just mental health in general. Would you say that that sort of polyphony is kind of necessary for tackling those themes?
I think in certain hands it could be tackled well, but the risk is it might become didactic if it's just one person, or overwhelmed. Like if one person's trying to face the climate crisis, so yes. I don't know how you go about that. Or if they were looking at precarity, perhaps precarity would work. So like the modern poorness of job stability and wages and things like that, it kind of comes in a little bit to the story. And I think if I was the kind of person who could write a decent issues book, then maybe I could do it, but I'm not George Orwell. No. I'm really not.
I think it's good to not be Orwell in some respects. In some respects, it's good to be in a idiosyncratic position, I think. Years ago, there was, in an interview, you mentioned you were working on a fantasy novel about a young woman who kills gods in a world very close to our own. So I just wanted to ask if there's any updates you can give on that project.
Yeah, it just ended up getting shelved. It really wanted to be a novella, and I tried to expand it into a novel, and it just didn't have the energy in it to do that. So I just kind of put it on the back burner. Novellas are hard, I think, to get any traction with. I kind of want to revisit maybe that aspect, but I don't think I've got the clout to get a novella published on its own.
Novella. Well, in the back of Mayhem and Death, you do have the novella Powdered Milk.
That's true.
How did that come? Was that sort of a short story that was kind of begging to be made longer, but not as long as a novel, or?
Well, the whole concept of mayhem and death is that the whole thing is tied together. That it's a longer story. So the story at the very beginning of the collection, Souterrain, is connected to Powdered Milk. And then I had in my mind, as I was constructing it, I'm not sure if it came through, the all the stories between are calling to the main character, Maddie, and sort of aspects of herself. They used to be in the dreams that were in the book Mayhem and Death, which is in Mayhem and Death.
Yes, the in-universe. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So it was incorporated in a way that I hope somewhat comes across. I'm not sure how successful that was in seeing whether, for people to see that it was all a cohesive or semi-cohesive whole.
Well, I mean, the opening story is definitely very clear that you're playing with the as you do in Bitter Hall, actually, the book as material object, because you're become very aware that you are holding Mayhem and Death, while Mayhem and Death is being, or sort of a, I suppose it brings up the question of how different is this fictionalized Mayhem and Death to the one you're reading, and then that sets off the whole reality fantasy, makes that wobble. I guess the dichotomy wobble.
Yes.
And I mean, like the sort of character relations in Powdered Milk are sort of remind me of Bitter Hall in almost that claustrophobic tone. Sort of, I mean, is that sort of another, along with Desire, is that sort of another, just seeing how characters struggle under extremity, is that sort of another interest, would you say?
I think that's just a narrative choice that you can get. You know, you're thinking as you write, what's interesting.
Sure, yes.
And to have people in high pressure situations is interesting. Also having people think they understand one thing, but they actually don't is another one I always kind of try and come back to.
Yeah.
So just little engines for getting into it, I think.
Nice. And sort of as a sort of final question, I asked this to Roseanne Watt. In Bitter Hall, you talk a lot about the musical the YouTube subgenre of slow down music, like, or music as if it's played in an abandoned mall, and that kind of weird hauntological kind of like remixes, I guess, or demixes. So I was wondering, do you have any good YouTube recommendations? Any fascinating snippets or glimpses from the great miasma of YouTube?
I did a whole playlist for Berlin.
Yeah.
Which I can send to you if you haven't had a look. But I kind of tend to follow the algorithm.
Yes.
Because I think it can take me to weird places. I often end up listening to like obscure 70s Japanese ambient music.
Yes, yeah.
Just wonderful stuff with like bird song and then weird synth beeps. And I just find it that randomness is really reassuring in an odd way.
Totally. Yeah. I think the YouTube algorithm is the most poetic, to be honest. I mean that sincerely. Like, it's you end up in some strange, like, there was a one I saw of a man connecting mushrooms to a modular synth.
Oh, I've heard that one. Yes. That was fantastic.
Incredible stuff. And I suppose it's sort of the what am I trying to say? Just the I think it's that serendipity is definitely just kind of what makes it unique, I guess, or stand out, for lack of a better term.
Definitely.
Yeah. Helen, thank you so much for chatting to me today. Yes, and seriously, Bitter Hall really is a profound achievement. Like, I really, really, I don't know if related is the right word, because I'm not in the crises of those characters, but I mean, like, it is really it feels like it's a really, come out of, just like set the bar really for Scottish literature. I really mean that. Like, it really, No, it was,
Way too kind.
I'm fumbling and blah, blah, blah. but it's all good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Ellen.